Hey guys, so the issue that I want to bring to the group, kind of, I guess, a generic thing to think through, and especially, I think this is one to bring to you guys, given where you are with your venture. Um, as you were growing, what do you think were the most common pitfalls that you would say to avoid as a growing business? So if you had to go back to past selves or people that are growing their businesses, um, obviously such as I am at the moment, what would you say are the most common pitfalls to avoid? That could be that you think are general pitfalls or that you personally experienced and maybe would like to call out. Yeah, so that's kind of where I wanted to go with that. Obviously, taking that to the bottom, there are a plethora of things that can go wrong when you're starting a company, and they say the majority of companies that start up fail within their first year. I mean, that's a damning statistic, and that says just how easy it is to do wrong. You can not pay enough attention to the bottom line. You could get the legal stuff wrong. I mean, it's an absolute minefield. Hiring, firing. There are so many problems that I couldn't even, begin to scratch the surface on taking it to the bottom. But if you guys could help me do that.
Yeah, I think one of the big issues you have is that you've got no form. And so everything is hypothetical at the start. And so you'll probably do a lot of planning, which is advised. But the problem with that planning is if you don't take it, I don't want to say with a pinch of salt, but if you don't understand that it's just planning, you might be in for a shock when things don't happen when you expect. So for example, the company we started, was it 6 or 7 years ago, I remember we had these plans of paying back the initial investment within the first year. And I think there's still like maybe 10% of that still to go of that initial investment, whereas actually we thought we're going to clear it in the first year. And if you don't do that and you don't create contingency for that, that could be your downfall, especially when you plan for something to happen by month 6, that month 7 depends on. Because then if it doesn't happen by month 6, month 7 can't happen. So I think some of that planning without prior form is what gets you in trouble when you start to need something to happen by a certain time. And then it doesn't. You need to have contingency. You need to understand that, things aren't going to happen the way you expect. And I think you know that more once you're in the flow of the business because there's form. You normally have some sort of surplus or some sort of support mechanism. You understand your company a bit better, and it's still risk, but at least you can make better, educated guesses of what's going to happen in the future.
So essentially, plan, but know that the plan will change.
Yeah.
And because of that, you've got to have your contingencies. You can't get caught, unawares, I guess.
Yeah.
Also, I think you've got to be sure that your business idea is viable. So there's probably something that we didn't necessarily do at the start because you could see it happening and you could see that it was viable elsewhere, but we probably never put costs down on paper as quick as we maybe should have, or even as strongly as we do now. Like the way that we now budget is intense, and Deola will lead on that, but we weren't doing that at the start. Probably because you can't and you're having to do lots of hypotheticals. But at the same time, you could end up seeing a huge gap in something and not having seen it coming. And that's why businesses don't last then for more than a year or fold within the year because there's something fundamental that was missed.
I think that's a major thing, actually, and a really important point. A lot of people start based on their idea, based on their hype, based on their passion, but they don't pay enough attention to the data, to the numbers, to the research, to find out that, this might actually be an idea that makes you 0.0 pounds. It's what
you can't put hope on a balance sheet. Like the things that you desire and the things that you hope for and you want it to happen, those are powerful motivators of starting a business. Otherwise you wouldn't do it, but they don't work on a balance sheet. And so you can have all these ideas and you need that to drive you forward. But actually, on the other side, there needs to be a bit of skepticism, a bit of risk awareness, and a bit of analytics of data. But at the same time, you don't want to go too far that way because then you won't do anything. I think there's another thing that comes with what you said there, Charlie, in terms of that zeal you start something with, is if you're one person and maybe you're a cleaner and you clean something really well, eventually, when it becomes scalable, you need other people to help you. They might not clean with the same passion and the same quality as you. And now is your core of your business strong enough to survive it growing around you? The other principles you have and the ethos you have, can they exist? Can you transmit that to your staff as your team grows? That's another one of the pitfalls that's going to happen, because your reputation is suddenly outside of your hands and outside of your control to a degree, and that can be damaging.
Yeah, I suppose that whole leadership thing, if you are working with a bunch of people at the start, that whole leadership thing is probably immense. And I think at that stage, you're wearing more hats than you would 5 years down the line. So one minute you're talking about finance, the next you're talking about a customer one customer's got a problem. But getting your staff or people around you to just switch between those hats can be really difficult. Because you can't afford to have a person for each role. So getting people to understand that sometimes is probably quite difficult.
So I guess even yet another pitfall is recruitment, getting the right people on board, getting people who recognize that given the size of the organization, you need to be adaptable and flexible, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, go on.
Is your company growing in a good extension of you? As in the bits that are better than you, that's good. But other than that, as it grows, whether that's in its policies, in its reach, in its staff, is that all growing onto the idea that you had, or is it growing against it? Are you taking people on who have different values, different principles, different ways of doing things? Managing that process of how things develop and grow is a very difficult process. And that might be even more difficult when there's more than one central person leading it, because now it has to be aligned with all these different. That's why it's so important when you start a business to know what your core statement is, what your vision statement is, what your mission statement is. And then when things grow, is it aligned to that? And is it helping you achieve those things? That's very difficult.
Okay. Obviously discussed a plethora of things, as was always going to be the case. I think we've even touched on a fair bit of the solutions, but let's give it that positivity. Let's bring it back up to the top. What are all the things that we can do, all the fixes for the possible pitfalls?
There's definitely stuff that if you could go back, I'd change or do differently. When you're doing a process, especially at the start where there are no policies, there's no processes in place, and it takes more time to actually do it the long way that you're doing it. But if you'd actually put an extra hour or two into creating that process and creating that system, initially the investment of time you've got to make to get that on board and up and running so you can pass it off to other people can sometimes be long. But in the long run, you're definitely going to save more time if you just create the simple process in the first place. And some of that is, I don't know, like, I want to do it now, so I'm going to do it quickly because I'll do it myself. Actually, there are probably times when I should have passed something over way earlier than I would have. So there's a bit of that at the start where you're like, actually, I can't do that now because that's too.
I think some of that's a bit of luck, isn't it? Because there's the way you need to do something, or need someone else to do something, or need to get a member of staff in, or whatever it might be. It might not always be the perfect person, and you're always going to have an element of firefighting at times. But I think it's recognizing the times when you can stop firefighting and start preparing the future in a way that's more structured. Because again, even some new companies don't like too much structure, because like you said earlier, you need to wear different hats. Whereas when you need to stop wearing a hat and give that hat to someone specifically, that's not something that's easy to know when that is.
No.
That's true.
It's not easy to know, but there have been, I think we're talking about things that we could have done differently. There are definitely times where I knew that I could have just passed that off if I just put a little bit more time. But because time is so precious at the start, you're like, I can't afford the 2 hours to create this system, but I know how to do it and I know how to get it.
And I suppose that's
by a certain time.
I agree, and that's the other point, isn't it? It's easy to see it retrospectively. When you're living the moment, you can't be too hard on yourself in terms of making those mistakes. You have to have the resilience to keep going. And I think doing anything new dictates you must have enough resilience and not hold on too tight to what you think things are going to be. You might have to stop and change and do things a different way, and then look back, analyze, and then do it different in the future.
Yeah, there's I think a really good bit in there for debate, and it's possibly, there's a lot of value. Obviously, there's time wasted, right, in doing things the long way around, but there's a lot of value in going through that and learning that. And sometimes there's no shortcut to that. You just have to learn those things, or you have to go through those painful moments to sometimes to appreciate and fully understand how to do things quicker. But that being said, Jankee, given what you said before, I'm all for the processes. And sometimes you don't even need to make a process for passing something on to someone. If you do something often enough, making a process that is clear, that is step by step, easily repeatable, automated, instead of kind of having like a gut feeling for it and using that gut instinct in the moment, I found it just massively helpful to me. And I can just kind of check my way through it, and then it requires less thought when I'm repeating it the next time and the time after and the time after that. And it has the added benefit of making it easy to just give to someone else, and then they check through the book.
Yeah, I think you should also know what your stress points are, and know it's almost like not gambling. In effect, it is a gamble, but in gambling, they say you should never gamble what you can't afford to lose. And so in your business, where is the point where you couldn't go on? Knowing that early, like, what are you willing to sacrifice? Because it's not all going to go right. Where can you dig deep? When can you go for more investment? When are you going to give it extra bit of time? When are you prepared to work 6 days a week, 7 days a week, for how long? Like, know what you're prepared to do to keep it going, because sometimes it might be the wrong business at the wrong time, and you should let it go. But you shouldn't let it go prematurely if you know that, if your plan told you that, no, I was going to work for 7 days a week for 6 months, that was part of it. And then you can do that, knowing that the aim is that it shouldn't be for more than 6 months.
Yep. Yeah, that's definitely an important shout, and a tough one, actually, especially for some people when it's it's a passion thing as well. And you are following your heart. But sometimes heart and business, they don't play ball. Right, guys, give me, obviously not to tie it up nicely, but I guess one radical thing I could do and one reasonable thing I could do, or that anyone could do when growing their business.
I think reasonably, you can plan reasonably. I think you've got to know, like what Deola is saying, your stress points. You've got to know what it is your plan is for 6 months' time, even if it's small, short targets that you're trying to achieve, to get you over the line for each checkpoint. I think that's important to try and do. I think having those goals set, and those financial goals, the quality goals, knowing how you're going to get there for each sort of checkpoint, and when you would call it a day on each of the areas. I think planning and where that comes in for me is what gets you over that line.
Yeah, and to be a bit more radical, I suppose, go all in. Like, we're gonna die someday. Give it your best shot, so that if it doesn't fail, you can say to yourself, you know what, I gave it everything I could. I tried the best I can. Be prepared to lose everything that you can reasonably lose, without it causing too much of a problem for you. But take it right to that limit. Understand where that limit is and give it everything you can. And that involves obviously doing the sensible things like research and maybe even some planning. But it means that you're not going to leave anything on the table. If it doesn't work, it's because you could not make it work, not because you did not make it work. And if you have that mentality, that's hopefully going to push you to the very end, so that when you've not done it, you say, well, I just couldn't do that, so I'm going to try the next thing. So yeah, give it your all.
I will actually just say one last thing though, because I was laughing halfway through, because I remember there's been a couple of things where Deola and I looked at each other and gone, oh my God, how did we not see that coming? Or how did we not count that? How did we not do this? And sometimes they're huge issues that if one of us two hadn't realized, it would have just disappeared. The whole company would have disappeared. But eventually you've got to kind of go, one of us is going to know or spot it, and you've got to trust that people around you are also going to spot that kind of thing. And there've been big issues as well, like you turn up in January and you're like, I've just calculated that something is incredibly wrong, which actually happened. And you can either fold then, or you're just going to keep going and say, well, we're going to have to work it out and fix it.
So what I've got is expect the unexpected. But actually, I think between the two main solutions you guys gave, as much as one was radical and one was reasonable, I think actually that they can work together. You give it all, you put your all on the table, but obviously you do your planning as well and make sure you've got your contingencies and your financial milestones. And most realistically, you know when to call it a day.
Yeah.
All right, guys, thanks for that. Really helpful. That's my piece, and that'll be all for me. Peace.
Ciao.